The Caldreth Military Academy had stood for 3,000 years at the edge of the Andromeda Spine, a gravitational anomaly that made the space around it shimmer like heat waves over desert sand. The Academy itself was carved from a moon-sized asteroid, its corridors stretching through rock that had witnessed the rise and fall of 14 galactic civilizations. It was, by every measurable standard, the most prestigious military institution in known space. Graduates went on to command fleets, negotiate treaties, and occasionally prevent extinction-level events before breakfast. The Academy's reputation rested on one particular tradition: the final trial. Every military academy in the galaxy had some version of a final exam. Most involved tactical simulations, essay dissertations on the philosophy of warfare, or particularly sadistic obstacle courses designed by instructors who clearly had unresolved childhood issues. The Caldreth Academy, however, had something special, something that made even the most decorated war heroes wake up in cold sweats decades after graduation. They had the Vrexcar. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Vrexcar biology, consider yourself fortunate. The creature stood roughly 12 feet tall when it bothered to stand upright, which it rarely did, because stalking on all 6 limbs made it faster, quieter, and infinitely more terrifying. Its exoskeleton was composed of a carbon-neutronium composite that made battleship armor look like wet tissue paper. It had sensor organs that could detect a heartbeat from 300 meters away, even through solid rock. Its reflexes operated on a neural network that processed information 17 times faster than the average sentient species. And it was, by every scientific measure conducted over the past millennium, completely and utterly unkillable. The galaxy had tried. Oh, how the galaxy had tried. Plasma cannons that could vaporize mountains left scorch marks on its hide that faded within hours. Kinetic weapons shattered against its carapace like champagne glasses against a bulkhead. One particularly ambitious Thrillaxian scientist had attempted to poison it with a neurotoxin capable of killing a blue whale in 30 seconds. The Vrexcar had absorbed the poison, metabolized it, and then excreted a substance that turned out to be an excellent furniture polish. The scientist had won an award for that, actually, though not the one he'd been hoping for. Molecular disruptors, gravitational crushers, directed energy weapons, exotic matter bombs. Everything humanity's more violent neighbors had dreamed up over millennia of creative warfare had been tested against Vrexcar specimens. The creatures didn't just survive. They thrived. They seemed to take personal offense at each new attempt, as if the galaxy was insulting their work ethic. So the Caldreth Academy had done what any sensible institution does when faced with an indestructible murder machine. They'd made it the final exam. The logic was beautifully simple, which is how you knew it came from military minds. If you couldn't kill the Vrexcar, and you couldn't outrun it indefinitely, then the only way to pass the trial was to survive it. For exactly 10 minutes, in a closed arena, with nothing but your wits, your training, and whatever equipment the Academy deemed appropriate for someone about to have the worst 10 minutes of their life. The survival rate was 100%, which the Academy touted proudly in its promotional materials. What they didn't mention was that the psychological scarring rate was also 100%, and that 17% of graduates refused to ever enter a room without checking the ceiling first. Instructor Vexthal had been administering the final trial for 43 years. He was a Corthian, which meant he stood 8 feet tall, had 4 arms that could each crush a standard pressure lock, and possessed a face that looked like someone had tried to sculpt a crocodile from angry obsidian and given up halfway through. His voice rumbled like tectonic plates discussing their feelings, and he had never, not once in 4 decades, smiled at a cadet. He'd seen everything, Cadets who'd frozen in terror, cadets who'd fought brilliantly and still barely survived. One memorable Yalithian who'd spent the entire 10 minutes screaming in a frequency that technically qualified as psychological warfare. Vexithal had watched them all, graded them all, and sent them on their way with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew he'd properly prepared them for a galaxy that didn't care about their feelings. And then, in his 43rd year of teaching, the Academy had admitted a human. The human's name was Marcus Webb, though most of the other cadets called him that weird biped from the Sol system. When they thought he couldn't hear, Marcus had arrived at Caldrith 6 months ago as part of Earth's recent admission to the galactic community, a political development that many species were still processing with various degrees of confusion and concern. Humans were new, aggressively new. They'd barely mastered faster-than-light travel before applying for membership in every galactic institution they could find. Like enthusiastic puppies who just discovered a dog park and wanted to pee on everything to establish their presence. The galaxy, broadly speaking, didn't know what to make of humans yet. They were physically unremarkable, just bipedal mammals with binocular vision and opposable thumbs. Their homeworld was a standard Class M planet with slightly higher gravity than the galactic average, orbiting a frankly boring G-type star. They'd barely survived their own technological adolescence, nearly blowing themselves up at least 3 times before achieving orbital flight. And yet there was something about humans that made the older species nervous. Maybe it was the way they approached problems. Maybe it was their disturbing tendency to treat established facts as opening arguments rather than final verdicts. Maybe it was the incident with the Pelcraxian trade delegation and what humans called hot sauce that had required 3 levels of diplomatic intervention and a formal apology from Earth's United Nations. Vexithal had reservations about teaching a human. He'd expressed these reservations to the Academy Commandant, who'd expressed them to the Galactic Education Committee, who'd expressed them right back down the chain of command with a memo that essentially said, "Deal with it," in 17 different bureaucratic languages. So Vexithal dealt with it. Marcus Webb was, objectively speaking, an adequate cadet. Not exceptional, not terrible. His physical scores were middling compared to species that had evolved in higher gravity or more competitive ecosystems. His tactical thinking was solid but unspectacular. His weapons proficiency was good with human-designed equipment and mediocre with standard galactic armaments. What bothered Vexithal, what truly kept him awake during his sleep cycles, was the questions. Humans asked so many questions, not the normal questions that cadets asked, like, "Will this be on the exam?" or "What happens if I fail?" No, humans asked questions like, "But why does it work that way?" And "Has anyone tried doing it differently?" And Vexithal's personal least favorite, "What if we're thinking about this wrong?" During a lecture on Vrexcar biology, Marcus had raised his hand 14 times. 14. The previous record for questions during that particular lecture was 2. And one of those had been, "May I be excused to vomit?" Marcus wanted to know about the Vrexcar's reproductive cycle, its metabolic processes, the composition of its armor at the molecular level, whether it needed to sleep, what it ate, how its sensory organs processed information, whether it had a circulatory system or something analogous, the thickness of its hide in different areas, its estimated weight, its joint flexibility. Vexithal had answered what he could, which was most of it. The Vrexcar had been studied extensively, after all. But each answer seemed to generate 3 more questions, and Marcus had taken notes in a battered physical notebook he'd brought from Earth, his primitive writing implement scratching across actual paper like some kind of historical reenactor. Now, Standing in the observation deck above the trial arena, Vexthal watched as the 19th cadet of the day completed their trial. A Zeltharan female named Kixteth had executed a textbook survival strategy. Constant movement, use of the arena's obstacle coverage, calculated risk-taking to maintain distance, and one desperate dive under the Vrex car's belly swipe that would probably give her nightmares for years, but had looked spectacular from up here. The timer hit 10 minutes. Klaxons sounded. The Vrex car, responding to the neural implant that kept it from turning every trial into a massacre, retreated to its holding cell with something that looked almost like disappointment. Kixteth collapsed on the arena floor, all four of her arms shaking, her respiratory spiracles gasping for air. She'd passed. They almost always passed. But they also almost always looked like they'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Vexthal made a note on his datapad, then checked the roster. One cadet remained, a Marcus Webb. Of course, the human had drawn the last slot, which was either extremely unlucky or exactly the kind of cosmic irony the universe loved to indulge in. The last trial of the day always felt different. The Vrex car was fully warmed up by then. The spectators in the observation deck, fellow cadets and instructors alike, were tired of watching the same survival strategies play out. Marcus entered the preparation chamber, a small room adjacent to the arena where cadets were given their equipment and a final briefing. Vexthal descended from the observation deck to deliver that briefing personally, as he always did for the final cadet of the day. The human stood in the center of the chamber, wearing the standard Academy combat suit. The suit was designed to protect against environmental hazards and minor injuries while doing absolutely nothing against a Vrex car attack. Because if the Vrex car actually hit you, you were going to learn an important lesson about dodging better next time. Cadet Webb, Vexthal rumbled. Instructor. Marcus nodded, which was apparently a human gesture of respect or acknowledgement, or possibly a minor seizure. Vexthal had never been entirely clear on that. You understand the parameters of the trial. Survive for 10 minutes. Don't die. Try not to embarrass Earth too badly. Marcus's mouth curved in what Vexthal had learned was a smile, though it looked disturbingly like a threat display. The Vrex car cannot be killed, Vexthal said, because this was important and bore repeating. No weapon in the galactic arsenal can harm it. Your only option is evasion and survival. Do you understand? I understand that's what everyone believes, Marcus said. Vexthal felt one of his secondary hearts skip a beat. Cadet Webb, this is not a matter of belief. This is documented fact. 3,000 years of research, thousands of trials. Every weapon system ever devised has failed to... Can I bring my own equipment? Marcus asked. Vexthal stopped, blinked his inner eyelids, processed the question. The standard loadout includes a grappling hook, a personal shield generator, 3 distraction flares, and... Yeah, I know the standard loadout. Can I bring my own equipment? Personal gear? This was irregular. In 43 years, no cadet had ever asked to bring personal equipment. The standard loadout was designed by experts. It had been refined over centuries. It was, by definition, optimal. What equipment? Vexthal asked, because apparently this was his life now. Marcus reached into a duffel bag he'd brought with him. He pulled out what looked like a primitive projectile weapon, all metal and wood and chemical propellant. A human firearm. Vexthal recognized it from his briefing materials on Earth technology. A kinetic weapon. Vexthal's voice could have frozen helium. You want to bring a kinetic weapon to fight a creature that has withstood orbital bombardment. I want to bring it to the trial, Marcus corrected. I don't remember saying anything about fighting. Cadet Web. That weapon will be useless. The Vrex car's armor. I know about the armor. I read the reports. All 14,000 pages of them. Marcus patted the weapon with what looked like affection. I'm bringing this anyway. Vexatal wanted to refuse. Should have refused. The problem was that nowhere in the Academy regulations did it explicitly forbid personal equipment. The rules specified what was provided, not what was prohibited. It was a loophole the size of a small moon, and somehow this human had found it. If you die, Vexthal said slowly, it will create a diplomatic incident that will consume the next decade of my life. Then I'd better not die, Marcus said cheerfully. Vexthal stared at the human. The human stared back. Humans, Vexthal had learned, were disturbingly good at staring contests. Fine, Vexthal growled. Bring your useless weapon. When it fails to save you, perhaps you'll have learned something about hubris in the 30 seconds before you're running for your life. Probably, Marcus agreed. The arena was exactly what you'd expect from an institution that had 3,000 years to optimize a space for ritualized trauma. It was 200 meters in diameter, with a ceiling 40 meters high. Obstacles dotted the floor. Walls for cover, pillars for climbing, trenches for hiding, all designed to give cadets options while ensuring those options were temporary at best. The observation deck wrapped around the entire arena, packed with the 18 cadets who'd already completed their trials and various instructors who apparently had nothing better to do than watch young beings have the worst day of their lives. Marcus stood at the entry gate, his human firearm slung across his back, the standard academy equipment clipped to his belt. He was rolling his shoulders, stretching his neck, doing the physical preparation rituals that humans seem to require before any stressful activity. Vexthal activated the arena speakers. His voice boomed across the space. Cadet Marcus Webb, you will have 10 minutes to survive against the Vrexcar. The trial begins when the creature enters the arena. The trial ends when the timer reaches 0 or when you are unable to continue. Do you understand these parameters? Crystal clear, Instructor, Marcus called back. Then we begin. Vexthal activated the release mechanism. The far gate opened with a grinding of metal on stone. For a moment, nothing happened. The arena was silent, except for the soft hum of the shield generators that kept the creature contained and the audience protected. Then, the Vrexcar emerged. It was always impressive, no matter how many times Vexthal saw it. The creature moved with a predatory grace that something that large had no right to possess. Its 6 limbs carried it forward in a rippling motion, claws clicking against the stone floor. The sensor organs on its head swiveled and focused, processing the arena, cataloging threats, finding the cadet. Finding Marcus. The Vrexcar's attention locked onto the human like a weapons targeting system achieving lock. It made a sound, something between a hiss and a clicking, that translated roughly to, I see you, and I'm going to make the next 10 minutes very educational. Marcus, to his credit, didn't freeze. He moved immediately, heading for the nearest obstacle cluster, his movements efficient and controlled. The standard strategy: maintain distance, use cover, survive. The Vrexcar charged. When a 12-foot-tall armored killing machine charges at you, it doesn't matter how good your training is. Some part of your brain, the ancient part that evolved back when you were prey to things with sharp teeth, starts screaming. Every cadet Vexthal had ever seen faced that charge with varying degrees of terror. Marcus dove behind a wall, rolled, came up moving. The Vrexcar smashed through the wall like it was made of sugar glass. Marcus was already gone, sprinting for a trench. Standard tactics, good execution. He was going to pass this trial the normal way, and that useless weapon on his back would remain exactly that. Useless. 3 minutes passed. Marcus survived through movement and clever use of terrain. The Vrex car pursued with the patient inevitability of entropy. This was normal. This was how the trial always went. 4 minutes. Marcus vaulted over a pillar. The Vrex car's claw missed him by centimeters, close enough that Vexithal saw the human's combat suit tear slightly from the near miss. In the observation deck, several cadets flinched in sympathy. 5 minutes. Halfway through. Marcus was breathing hard now, the exertion showing in his movements. He was doing well. Better than expected for a species so new to galactic military doctrine. 6 minutes. Marcus used a distraction flare. The bright burst of light and sound making the Vrex car hesitate for exactly 1.3 seconds before its multiple sensory organs compensated. Marcus used those seconds to create distance. Textbook technique. 7 minutes. The Vrex car was closing the gap now, learning Marcus's patterns, adapting. It always adapted. That's why it was such a good teacher. It forced you to keep evolving your strategy or die trying. Marcus reached for his back, drew the weapon. In the observation deck, someone laughed. It was a nervous laugh, the kind that comes when you see someone about to do something remarkably stupid, and you're not sure whether to be horrified or impressed by their commitment to idiocy. Marcus aimed the weapon at the Vrex car and fired. The sound was shockingly loud, a chemical explosion propelling a metal projectile at supersonic speeds. It was primitive technology, the kind the galaxy had abandoned millennia ago in favor of energy weapons and exotic physics. The bullet struck the Vrex car's chest armor and ricocheted off with a shower of sparks, exactly as predicted by 3,000 years of documented research. The Vrex car paused, tilted its head, made a sound that might have been amusement or possibly indigestion. Marcus fired again. Same result. The bullet sparked off the armor and embedded itself in an arena wall. Cadet web. Vexthal's voice boomed across the arena. That weapon is useless. You are wasting time and ammunition. Am I? Marcus shouted back and fired a third time. This shot hit differently. Not because it penetrated the armor, it didn't. But Marcus wasn't aiming at the chest anymore. He was aiming at the joints, at the gaps between armor plates where the Vrex car's exoskeleton needed flexibility to move. The bullet sparked off the shoulder joint. The Vrex car flinched. Not from pain. The creature barely felt pain as humans understood it. But the impact at a joint, the transfer of kinetic energy to a vulnerable articulation point that registered as something requiring attention. Marcus fired again, and again, methodically working his way through his ammunition, each shot targeting a different joint. Shoulder, elbow, knee, hip. The creature's movements became incrementally less fluid. 8 minutes. In the observation deck, the laughter had stopped. Cadets leaned forward, watching. Instructors exchanged glances. This wasn't how the trial went. This wasn't survival tactics. This was something else. Marcus ejected an empty magazine, loaded a fresh one with practiced efficiency. Human firearms, Vexthal remembered from his briefing materials, used replaceable ammunition storage. Primitive, but functional. The Vrex car charged again, faster now, annoyed. Marcus didn't run. He stood his ground, weapon raised, and fired in a controlled burst at the creature's front legs as it closed the distance. Then he dove, not away from the creature, but toward it, sliding under its bulk like he was stealing a base, which meant nothing to anyone in the arena except Marcus. But the movement was smooth and practiced and got him exactly where he apparently wanted to be, directly beneath the Vrex car's center of mass. From underneath, Marcus fired upward. Not at the armor. At the joints where the legs connected to the body. At the vulnerable articulation points that needed flexibility to support the creature's massive weight. The Vrex car reared back, its movements now noticeably less coordinated. One of its front legs buckled slightly. Not broken, the armor prevented that. But the joint was responding to the cumulative kinetic impacts, the repeated stress on points that had never been designed to take direct fire, because why would they be? No one shot at Vrex car, joints. Everyone shot at the armor, where it was strongest, where 3,000 years of testing had proved weapons were useless. Marcus rolled clear and came up running. 9 minutes. "Instructor," Marcus called out, still moving, still maintaining distance from the increasingly frustrated creature. "You said no weapon can stop it." "That is correct, Cadet Webb," Vexthal responded, his voice tight. "Define stop." Vexthal blinked. "Render it unable to continue its pursuit." "And does it need to be killed for that?" Marcus asked, firing another controlled burst at the Vrex car's rear legs. The trials have never..." Vexthal stopped, processed, felt something like a door opening in his mind, and through that door, he saw 3,000 years of assumptions. 9 minutes, 30 seconds. The Vrex car was moving differently now. Its charge was slower, its coordination compromised. Not by damage to its armor, that was fine. Not by injury to its internal systems, those were protected by that beautiful, indestructible hide. But by accumulated stress on its joints, the weak points in any biological or mechanical system, the places where you had to choose between protection and mobility. The galaxy had spent 3,000 years trying to kill the Vrex car, trying to penetrate its armor, destroy its organs, stop its heart, or whatever it had that served that function. No one had tried to just inconvenience it into immobility. 10 minutes. The klaxon sounded. The trial was over. Marcus lowered his weapon. The Vrex car, responding to the neural implant, began its retreat to the holding cell. It limped slightly, favoring its left side where the joints had taken the most concentrated fire. In an hour, the creature's remarkable healing biology would have those joints functioning normally again. But for now, for these crucial few minutes, it moved like something that had learned a new and uncomfortable lesson about human stubbornness. The arena was silent. The observation deck was silent. The entire academy, it seemed, had taken a collective breath and forgotten to exhale. Marcus walked to the arena exit, slinging his weapon across his back. When he reached the gate, he looked up at the observation deck, at Vexthal, and gave that disturbing threat display smile again. "You said no weapon can stop it," Marcus called out. "You were right, but you never said no weapon can slow it down enough to survive it." The observation deck erupted, not in applause, not exactly. More in the confused noise that comes when a group of people collectively realizes they've been thinking about a problem wrong for longer than most civilizations have existed. Vexthal descended to the arena level. He met Marcus in the preparation chamber. The human was sweating, breathing hard, adrenaline clearly still coursing through his primitive mammalian bloodstream. "That was not," Vexthal said slowly, "the intended solution to the trial." "Was it against the rules?" Marcus asked. "No." "Did I survive for 10 minutes?" "Yes." "Then I passed." Marcus began unloading his weapon with the careful attention humans gave to their tools. The trial isn't called Kill the Vrex car. It's called Survive the Vrex car. I survived. By exploiting a semantic distinction and 3,000 years of tactical assumptions. By reading the trial parameters carefully and preparing accordingly. Marcus looked up. Instructor, with respect, the galaxy has been trying to kill these things for millennia. You've got thousands of pages of documentation on what doesn't work. You know everything about their armor, their healing, their invulnerability. And you forgot that mobility isn't the same thing as invulnerability. The joints have to flex. They have to absorb impact. They're designed to handle the creature's weight and movement, not repeated kinetic strikes from unexpected angles. Marcus patted his weapon. This doesn't have to kill it. It just has to make it inconvenient for the Vrex car to keep chasing me. Vexthal was quiet for a long moment. You weaponized inconvenience. I prefer to think of it as tactical annoyance, Marcus said. But yes. This will change how the Academy approaches the trial. Will it? Marcus asked. Because here's the thing, Instructor. Your trial isn't really about the Vrex car. It's about teaching cadets to think creatively under pressure, to survive impossible situations, to keep going when everything they know says they should give up. He finished securing his weapon and looked at Vexthal directly. I just did that differently than expected. You could have simply evaded like everyone else. I could have. Marcus agreed. But humans have this really annoying habit of looking at impossible problems and asking, what if it's not actually impossible? We do it with everything. We did it when everyone said we'd never reach our moon. We did it when physics said we couldn't break the light barrier. We do it when someone serves us food and says this is too spicy for humans to eat. The Pelcraxian incident? The Pelcraxian delegates recovered eventually, Marcus said defensively. Mostly. Vexthal made a sound that might have been a sigh, or possibly the structural settling of his exoskeleton. You realize this will generate extensive documentation, reports, analysis. The Academy will want to understand if your approach was luck or strategy. It was both, Marcus said. Good strategies usually are. And you'll need to brief other cadets on your methodology. Only if the Academy wants me to. But, Instructor, here's the thing. I don't think you should change the trial based on what I did. That surprised Vexthal. Why not? Because the next impossible situation cadets face might not have a solution like this one. They need to learn survival first, evasion, endurance, all the traditional tactics. Marcus smiled again. But maybe, just maybe, it's useful for them to see that sometimes the impossible is just the improbable wearing intimidating armor. Vexthal considered this. Considered the human. Considered 3,000 years of tradition and one afternoon of someone asking uncomfortable questions about joint articulation and kinetic energy transfer. You passed the trial, he said finally. Congratulations, Cadet Webb. Thank you, Instructor. You also gave me more paperwork than I've had in 43 years of teaching. You're welcome, Instructor, Marcus said. And that smile definitely looked like a threat display now. Later, after the reports were filed, and the Academy had collectively processed what they'd witnessed, Vexthal found himself in the Commandant's office explaining how a human cadet had technically defeated the unkillable creature by refusing to define defeat the way everyone else did. The Commandant, a Vrelian with skin like polished jade and a temperament like a hangover, listened to the entire explanation without interrupting. When Vexthal finished, there was a long silence. So he shot it in the knees, the Commandant said finally. Repeatedly and with disturbing accuracy, Vexthal confirmed. And this worked. Sufficiently well to complete the trial parameters, yes. Another silence. The Commandant brought up the trial footage on her display, watched the key moments, focused on the shots where Marcus targeted the joints with what appeared to be a prepared strategy rather than random panic fire. He studied the creature's anatomy, she observed. For 6 months. He asked more questions about the Vrexcar than any cadet in Academy history. And none of us thought to ask why he was so interested in joint flexibility and articulation points. In our defense, Vexthal said, no one has asked those questions before because they weren't relevant to survival strategy. They are now. The Commandant closed the footage. The Terran diplomatic corps is going to be insufferable about this. Earth does seem to enjoy exceeding expectations in uncomfortable ways. Vexthal agreed. Do we change the trial? Vexthal thought about Marcus's words, about survival and creativity, and the difference between impossible and improbable. No, he said. We keep it as is. But perhaps we add an annotation to our briefing materials. What annotation? That no weapon can stop the Vrexcar. Vexthal said slowly. But that students should carefully consider what stop means in a survival context. The Commandant's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile on a species more prone to expressing satisfaction. You're encouraging them to think like humans. I'm encouraging them to think creatively. If that occasionally resembles human cognition, well. Vexthal shrugged, a gesture he'd learned from watching Marcus. The galaxy could do worse than learning a few lessons from a species that took impossible as a personal challenge. Elsewhere in the Academy, in the cadet quarters, Marcus was explaining his trial strategy to a group of fascinated and slightly horrified alien classmates. He'd laid out his weapon, his notes, his calculations on joint stress and kinetic energy transfer. But weren't you afraid it wouldn't work? Asked Kixteth, the Zeltharan who'd completed her trial just before Marcus. Terrified, Marcus admitted cheerfully. But fear isn't a reason not to try something. Fear is just your brain's way of saying, this is important, pay attention. And if you'd been wrong? Another cadet asked. If the joints had held? Then I'd have spent 10 minutes running and dodging like everyone else, Marcus said. The weapon was a calculated risk. I studied the creature. I did the math. I made an educated guess. But I also packed the standard equipment and knew how to use it. You always have a backup plan. Humans are strange, Kixteth said. But it didn't sound like an insult. More like an observation, possibly even a compliment. We get that a lot, Marcus agreed. We're working on it. Or maybe we're not. I haven't decided which would be more alarming to everyone else. The group laughed, that universal sound of tension releasing, of shared experience creating bonds between beings who'd started as strangers and were slowly becoming something like friends. Later, much later, when the Academy lights had dimmed to simulate night, and most cadets were trying to sleep off the adrenaline and trauma of their trials, Marcus sat in his quarters, cleaning his weapon. The ritual was soothing, the familiar motions of disassembly and maintenance, the smell of gun oil, and the quiet satisfaction of caring for a tool that had performed exactly as needed. His datapad chimed. A message from Earth, from his family. They wanted to know how the trial had gone, if he'd passed, if he was okay. Marcus smiled and began composing a response. Dear Mom and Dad, he typed. Remember how you always said I asked too many questions? Turns out that's a survival skill in the galactic military. Who knew? Love you both. Tell Jenny her big brother is officially a graduate of the most prestigious military academy in known space. And he did it by basically shooting a monster in the ankles until it got annoyed. He paused, considered, added, Also, I might have accidentally revolutionized 3,000 years of military doctrine. But it was technically an accident. So that should count for something in terms of not causing diplomatic incidents, right? He sent the message and continued cleaning his weapon, humming an old Earth song about persistence and refusing to give up. Outside his window, the Andromeda spine glittered with gravitational distortions, beautiful and dangerous and utterly indifferent to the small dramas of sentient life. But inside the Kaldreth Military Academy, on a moon-sized asteroid at the edge of known space, a new story was being born. The story of the human who'd looked at an impossible creature and asked the most dangerous question in any language. But what if we're thinking about this wrong? The galaxy, as it turned out, didn't have a good answer to that question. But it was learning, one annoyed Vrexcar at a time. The final irony, the one that would be discussed in academy halls for generations, was this. For 3,000 years, the most prestigious military institution in the galaxy had used an unkillable creature to teach cadets about survival. And it had taken a species barely 20 years into galactic society to point out that survival and victory weren't the same thing. That impossible and difficult were cousins, not twins. And that sometimes the best weapon against an invulnerable enemy was the audacity to simply inconvenience it into irrelevance. Humans, as Instructor Vexthal would note in his official report, had a remarkable talent for taking universally accepted facts and treating them like opening arguments in a negotiation. It was frustrating, uncomfortable, and occasionally brilliant. Mostly, though, it was just very, very human. And the galaxy, for better or worse, was going to have to get used to that.